you. Glad we could hop on here for yet another conversation. Just a real quick response to that speech we just heard from Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden gave his speech to a joint session of Congress, technically not a State of the Union speech, but he did give a speech to a joint session of Congress on the eve of his 100th day in office. So I figured before I go home for tonight, after I listen to that speech, I might as well react. So why not? Why not react to what we just heard there, that speech that we just heard? Well, folks, I will say that I never in my life did I ever think I would hear such a left-wing speech from an American president. And there were many, many, many things that Joe Biden said tonight, which I agree with. I'm not a fan of Joe Biden in many ways. I view him as a guy who's got a career as a centrist and a sellout and a phony, but I must say, I heard a lot of things tonight that I liked. I did. But I also heard a menace, a very, very dangerous menace behind those right things. So first of all, I'll just tell you what I liked, what I heard. And I'll just quickly, infrastructure, boom, 100% correct. He is 100% right. The infrastructure of the United States is falling apart. We need new bridges, we need new highways, we need trains, we need better public transportation. Joe Biden is 100% right about that. We need new jobs. I'm with him 100% on that. Now, to be fair, we did hear this from Obama, and he didn't do it. And we heard this from Trump, and Trump didn't do it. And every president we've had over the last two presidents both promised they were going to fix America's infrastructure and didn't do it. So words are nice, Joe, but if you actually do this, I'll be impressed. I'll be much more impressed. But I agreed with all of that. What else did I agree with? Wow, what he said about the PRO Act and labor unions and the right to organize. Wow, Obama, you'll remember, talked that way on the campaign trail. He advocated what was called the Employee Free Choice Act. He said he would support unions. And as soon as he got into the office of presidency, he forgot all about organized labor. Not Biden. I mean, as a sitting president, he said that unions built the middle class. He said, that he was going to, that we need to support the PRO Act. That's big. That's very, very big that Biden said that. It's a big deal. And look, as much as I am a critic of Biden, we don't want to downplay any of this. When he said that health care is a right, not a privilege, but a right. Wow. When he said trickle-down economics has never worked. Full repudiation of neoliberalism. Wow. That was excellent. I heard a lot of things tonight that I liked. He talked about the need to get over historic injustices in this country. I heard a lot of things I agreed with. And, to be genuine, to prove to you all I'm not just some kind of partisan hack and all of that, I'll just be real with you. There were a lot of things he said in the speech that sounded really, really good. Now, we'll see what action happens. We'll see if there's actual action to back it up. But behind the great, rolling out of a welfare state program, talk of guaranteeing people college education, there was a menace. There was a dark, sinister menace behind every good thing he said. Okay? He opened his speech by saying that we inherited a nation in crisis and that the January 6th events, he said, were the greatest. He said that the events of January 6th were the greatest attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Well, I'm sorry, folks, that's not a historically accurate statement. There have been way more undemocratic things done than, an act of vandalism and trespassing in the U.S. Congress, right? There's been Japanese internment, rounding up a whole group of people simply because of their ethnicity during the Second World War. That was certainly, undemocratic and a threat to our democracy. What else was there? There was, in addition to that, you had COINTELPRO and the brutal suppression of the Black Liberation Movement by the FBI. That was an attack on our democracy. Again, much bigger than just a bunch of rednecks running around Congress and breaking windows. You can talk about McCarthyism. And, the Maupin Internal Security Act that actually set up concentration camps for dissident Americans. Google the 1951 Maupin Internal Security Act. I'm sorry, but to say that January 6th, the demonstration in which Trump supporters broke into the U.S. Capitol, to say that was the greatest attack on U.S. democracy since the end of the Second World War, or since the Civil War, that was a particularly outrageous statement. But he went on from there. As he was ending his speech, he continued throughout the speech to refer to President Xi Jinping and governments around the world that are critical of the United States as autocrats. Autocrats. That was the new word, autocrat. And then he ended his speech by equating these governments around the world, like Iran, like Russia, like North Korea, equating them with Donald Trump, and saying that that the autocracy, that this stuff has not, the democracy and America's uniqueness is overcoming. That's big, folks. That's very, very big. Right now, we are seeing an attempt by the imperialists to usurp the progressive and left-wing values that communists and anti-imperialists have always fought for, and utilize them to serve the purpose of empire building, right? Iran has never had a nuclear weapons program. Never has Iran had a nuclear weapons program. Iran has only had a peaceful nuclear energy program. And they gave most of it up at a nuclear deal that, Obama's administration oversaw. North Korea only has nuclear weapons because Bill Clinton broke the deal that agreed to have them not get nuclear weapons, right? Bill Clinton made a deal with them to not get nuclear weapons, and then he did not fulfill his end of the bargain. The U.S. Congress didn't fund the deal. And so North Korea was basically forced into a situation where, because the United States declared them the axis of evil and didn't give them all the food aid that it had promised and all the support that it had promised, North Korea acquired nuclear weapons. And then he says, well, if it turns out that if it's true, Russia, we have to put sanctions on Russia. Well, I'm sorry, but I've never seen any proof of Russian meddling in the U.S. elections. I've never seen any proof. I've never seen, and he says, turns out it's true. Why is it true? Just because you said it's true? You said it's true? Meanwhile, doesn't the United States meddle all over the world in elections? Isn't the USA meddling in elections in places like Venezuela, in places, in like Belarus, where they tried to destabilize the country? Belarus, they had an election. The USA doesn't like Lukashenko because he's got a nationalized economy and he's, an anti-imperialist. And so after that election, not only did the United States interfere and demonize Lukashenko, the United States sponsored huge protests and violence across the country. U.S.-funded NGOs were involved in destabilizing Belarus. All over the world, the USA meddles in elections. No proof has been provided that Russia meddled in the USA elections, but Biden says, oh, turns out it's true. Why? Because he said so, and now he gets to put sanctions on Russia. Very scary stuff. When he talked about, winning against China in the 21st century, again, folks, there's one human race, one human family. One human family. We cannot view the human race and technological progress and economic development as a competition. We can't do that. We absolutely cannot view technological progress and human advancement as a competition. The USA shouldn't be trying to outcompete with Russia and China and Iran and Venezuela and countries like that. The USA should be working with them. There should be an international conference to push for fusion energy. There should be international efforts to get over this pandemic. Immediately, all the patents on the vaccines should be lifted, all right? And everybody should be able to get whatever vaccination they want as fast as possible. And the rhetoric, again, behind all the amazing populist left-wing economic rhetoric we heard tonight about infrastructure, about healthcare, about trickle-down economics not working, about labor unions, about jobs, behind all of that was this menace, this belief that somehow, because Joe Biden is the president of the United States, because he's using, progressive-minded rhetoric, that this gives the United States the moral upper hand to wage all-out war against autocrats like China, like Russia, like Cuba, like Iran, like North Korea, and on top of that, I mean, there were a couple remarks that were particularly interesting. Now, there was one comment where he talked about the war on terror and pulling troops out of Afghanistan. And he said that, ISIS and Al-Qaeda have expanded in places like Somalia and Syria and Yemen. Well, that's due to U.S. efforts. That's due to the efforts of the United States. That's due to the fact that the USA was arming these kind of terrorist groups in Libya and in Syria, and arming those kind of groups. And the fact that the war on terror, it hasn't really been the United States fighting the terrorists. It's been the United States fighting against the enemies of the terrorists. The United States overthrew the Iraqi government. The United States overthrew the government of Libya. The USA has been acting like Al-Qaeda's air force in the Middle East. And then he said the greatest threat in the United States is white supremacist terrorists, right? Of course, referring to January 6th. Again, another attempt to try and link anti-imperialist states with right-wing extremists and Ku Klux Klan fascist kind of forces in the United States. Well, that's not historically accurate, folks. Just not historically accurate. The Soviet Union was a huge friend of the civil rights movement. The Martin Luther King Jr., read the statements that were written in support of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by Mao, the founder of the Chinese Revolution. Mao Zedong wrote beautiful statements in support of Dr. Martin Luther King. Robert F. Williams, go Google Robert F. Williams. He was a leader of the NAACP in North Carolina. And when Robert F. Williams was being harassed because he armed the African American community to defend themselves against the Klan, where did he go? He went to China. He went to Cuba, right? This is very, 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 very disturbing to see this kind of rhetoric. And thank you, Alvaro, for the super chat. To see this kind of rhetoric trying to link anti-imperialist states that have been good friends of progressive people. Look, Gaddafi in Libya, he gave big support. All right, ISIS going after. And I'll write down your super chats as they come in. I'm not going to go too late tonight, but ISIS going after China, right? And this is very scary stuff. This is very, very scary stuff. Trying to give the United States the moral imperative and say that the United States is now the purveyor of progressive values. And on that basis, we get to overthrow. Look, I've said many, many times, folks, that right now there's an attempt to give the United States a woke makeover. And, make the United States look like the progressive woke country, to give it the basis for, rolling back the influence of Russia and China around the world. And that's very dangerous. That's very, very dangerous, folks. It's very, very dangerous. Now, I'm happy to see Joe Biden talk about labor unions. That's great. I'm happy to hear Joe Biden talk about health care and education. I'm happy to hear Joe Biden talk about labor union rights and infrastructure. I'm happy to hear him attack trickle-down economics. I am very happy to hear all of that. However, the one thing that disturbs me is that while Joe Biden is talking that way, which is great, and that's what Americans want to hear, we know that in the circles of people that are carrying out Joe Biden's agenda, the synthetic left has declared those topics are off limits. That's class reductionism. Did you know that? You're not allowed to talk about those issues. If you talk about them, that means you're a fascist in bread tube circles, right? And, that when Joe Biden rolled out his infrastructure plan, there were members of his administration who didn't support it. On the grounds that infrastructure was a white male issue. This is disturbing, Black people drive on roads, women drive on roads, LGBT people drive on roads. There's nothing white and male about infrastructure. But the woke crowd that is trying to give the United States a woke makeover, Biden's mobs that are trying to give the United States this woke makeover, they have a very different perspective. I loved a lot of what I heard from Joe Biden tonight. It was refreshing to hear Trump up there, America will never be a socialist country. To hear Trump up there demonizing Iran excessively and all that. It was a relief the way Biden talked tonight. But that reorientation is very, very, very dangerous. Woke imperialism. Woke imperialism is very, very, very dangerous. Very, very, very dangerous. I liked that Joe Biden emphasized pulling U.S. troops out of Afghanistan, but we know that U.S. intelligence is going to remain there. U.S. military contractors are going to remain there, and the USA is going to continue to try to stop Iran and China from economically developing Afghanistan with trade and transport. They're going to continue to see out Afghanistan remain an unstable place full of drug gangs and terrorists. There's a lot to be concerned about. There is a menace behind the rhetoric that we heard tonight. But great rhetoric. Look, it was a relief. This was a relief. Compared to some of the Trump speeches we heard, oh boy, this was a relief. But there is a menace behind it. There is a pro-imperialist narrative that somehow Trump and white nationalists in the United States are the same as Russia and China and Iran and North Korea. That's so wrong. I've been to Iran. They have pictures of Malcolm X all over Iran. They have pictures of the Palestinian people and their struggle for freedom. The Iranian Revolution was a progressive movement. It was a progressive Islamic revolution. I've been to Venezuela and I've seen their support and their statements about racism in the United States. So it's very, very, very dangerous to try and equate the anti-imperialists of the world with fascists and far-right elements in the United States. And furthermore, this will be used to justify a clampdown, right? Just like they're banning Donald Trump and his supporters from social media, they're going to continue to try and silence people like you and me who want peace with China or peace with Russia or peace with Iran or North Korea. And they're going to use it by making that equation. Mistakes in Afghanistan. By making that equivocation, this is very, very dangerous, folks. It's extremely dangerous. It's extremely, extremely dangerous. That's basically my reaction. I don't have that much to say about it. And also I must say there are differences. There are differences, within the Biden administration, right? There are different factions. Kamala Harris represents a faction that's far more dangerous, I would say. Come on, man. It's far more dangerous than Biden himself, right? Biden is trying to be the woke grandpa, trying to, look like he's stabilizing the country and all of that. But, Kamala Harris represents something a little bit more dangerous. But yes, tonight's speech, not a lot to disagree with. And this is an important thing. Don't fall into the trap, and I urge people to do this. Don't fall into the trap of tit for tat, of, what do they call it? Tu quo que. Don't fall into the trap of just because you don't like somebody, arguing against everything they said, right? The American working families need to know that those of us who are anti-imperialist are also big supporters. Why? Iran. Also big supporters of, contrarianism. Yeah, don't fall into contrarianism. Thank you, Hipasha Muse. Don't fall into contrarianism, right? Those of us who want peace with Venezuela and Iran and Cuba and Russia and China, the American people should know we also want unions. We also want health care and jobs. We also want infrastructure. Right? And they shouldn't fall into the belief that you have to pick. And that's what Biden is trying to do. He's trying to create a narrative. Well, if you're a progressive and support what I'm doing, the progressive reforms I'm doing in the United States, then you should support my efforts to destabilize these countries. Well, no. The reason that the government of Iran is popular is because of all the infrastructure they built and all the programs they've had to aid women and to empower oppressed national minorities and all the services they've provided. Right? The reason that the Chinese government is so widely loved is because of all the infrastructure they've built and all the people they've raised out of poverty. So the idea that supporting Biden's progressive economic reforms, let's see if they happen, his proposed economic reforms, means that you then have to support his efforts to tear down progressive governments around the world, that is a complete mischaracterization. But that is how That is how they want us to think about it, right? This is part of what I've been saying about the synthetic left and the woke makeover, right? And it's very, very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. Extremely dangerous, right? We are for, if you're a real anti-imperialist, you are 100% for healthcare for Americans. You are 100% for jobs for Americans. You want America to have better infrastructure. You want this country to have healthcare for all, education for everybody. You realize trickle-down economics has never worked. That's all good. We are not in disagreement with that at any point. But what scares us is seeing progressive reforms, specifically progressive economic reforms, associated with pro-imperialist foreign policy. Because at the end of the day, the reason that the United States hates Russia, the reason the United States hates China, the reason the United States hates Iran and North Korea and Venezuela and Cuba is because they have broken out of the global international capitalist system. That's why the United States can't stand these countries. The United States, the U.S. imperialists, the global monopolists don't like that these countries have done progressive things, seized control of their economies. In the 90s, when Russia had a free market economy with Boris Yeltsin, the USA and, Bill Clinton loved Boris Yeltsin. But when Putin came in and stabilized the Russian economy by reasserting public control over oil and gas, and using that to stabilize the economy, now the United States is anti-Russia. Same with China. When China was the sick man of Asia, deeply poor, free market country, the British forced free market economics on China in the Opium Wars, the USA loved China. But when China broke free and started building its own schools and hospitals and steel mills, all of a sudden China was a threat, right? And now that China is the second largest economy in the world, it's broken out of their system and their control, it's a threat. Same with Iran. When when the oil of Iran was basically being used to make profits for British bankers, for the Rockefellers and such, that the USA loved the Shah's regime in Iran, and the Shah tortured people, etc., and they had no problem with it. But when Iran broke free in the 1979 Islamic Revolution and used the oil money to care for the people and build up infrastructure, all of a sudden the USA hated Iran. Right? Venezuela in the 90s, when Venezuela was having austerity and people were, hungry in the streets and electricity would go off in different parts of the country for weeks, the U.S. imperialists loved Venezuela. When Venezuela broke free and started using its oil to build 11 new universities and eliminate poverty, that's when they had an issue with them. Progressive policies in the imperialist homeland should not be used to convince people to support imperialist policies around the world. And that is dangerous. And we shouldn't be seeing the international community as a competition. Biden weaponizing popular culture. Weaponizing pop culture. So this is really dangerous. Very, very dangerous, folks. Very, very dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. And, attempting to equate anti-imperialist states around the world with Donald Trump. Donald Trump murdered Qasem Soleimani. Donald Trump started the trade war with China. Donald Trump put Cuba back on the state sponsor of terrorism list. Donald Trump almost got us into a war with Venezuela. So don't try to tell me that, yes, Donald Trump may have been less excited about sending troops to countries than Obama or his predecessors. But don't tell me that Donald Trump is what anti-imperialists are all about, right? Don't tell me that if you oppose war with Russia or war with China, that makes you on Donald Trump's side, all right? I'm sorry, but the Trump administration was full of pro-imperialist activity. But that's a very, very dangerous, and that's, first of all, the personal attacks on our community, right? The Naz Bowl, all of that, that's what they're trying to infer. That the United States, the U.S. imperialists, that they are somehow the purveyor of woke, progressive values, and they are spreading it around the world. And if you support Joe Biden and his woke makeover of America, that means that you are also a supporter of imperialism. And that is extremely dangerous, right? I loved a lot, I can't think of a single thing that Biden said about his domestic agenda that I disagreed with. It was great to hear an American president say that healthcare is a right, to say that unions built the middle class, to talk about white supremacists being the real terrorists, and basically to urge the attacks on the Muslim community to end, to call for legalization and the end to the raids and the migrant community. I mean, that's the immigrant communities in the United States, to have some of the terror against them end. That's great, right? And don't fall into the contrarian trap of poo-pooing that or no that. Look, and let's also, this is a point that needs to be made. Joe Biden wouldn't be talking this way if it wasn't for the fact that last summer there was a huge explosion of unrest. The pandemic lit a powder keg, and the killing of George Floyd lit up this country. And people throughout the country were in the streets, and there was a whirlwind of resistance. And if anything, the fact that Joe Biden waited until the eve of his 100 days in office to give this speech probably indicates that they are anticipating another summer of rebellion, right? I don't know if you ever heard that the Rolling Stones in the 1960s, the Rolling Stones, they had a song called Street Fighting Man. You ever heard it? It's a song about protests and rowdy, violent protests, which were popular in the 60s. And one of the lyrics is, the summer's here and the time is right for fighting in the streets. And that's true. I mean, people tend to take to the streets and rebel in summertime. And I think that the Biden administration is anticipating a hot summer of unemployed, angry young Americans taking to the streets to rebel. And because of that, we heard this very, very, very woke speech full of promises. But we already know that the rhetoric of the Biden administration and the actions of the Biden administration don't line up, okay? We already know that. Number one, Biden said he would end the war in Yemen. Do you remember that? Well, the USA is still selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is still bombing and murdering people in Yemen. So he might have said that, I will end the war in Yemen. The war in Yemen has escalated. And the U.S., backing of Saudi Arabia and its atrocities against the Yemeni people hasn't ended. Biden said when he was running that when he was president, he would only deport violent criminals. Only violent criminals would be deported. But yet, since he's been president, we've already seen hundreds of people who weren't violent criminals get deported. And now he's making all these great promises. He's going to give everyone 4 years of college. He's going to make health care a right. He's going to drive down the cost of prescription drugs. Let's see it. Let's see it, Joe. I want to see it. I am way past judging politicians by what they say. I am at the point where I judge politicians by what they do. And that is why I have hammered home that we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Action. Concrete, material action to resolve the crisis. Joe, you bring those troops from Afghanistan right home right now. You put them to work rebuilding our highways and our bridges, and you do it. If you actually take the action and do it, Joe, if you don't just put it up there and say, oh, the Republicans outvoted me, oh boy, right? But you do it. I'll respect you much more, Joe. But we're watching you, Joe. We're watching you. I think I speak for the whole community that is watching these lives. We're watching you, Joe. We know what you're getting at with your rhetoric, trying to equate Donald Trump, the murderer of Qasem Soleimani, the crusher of Venezuela, the attacker of Venezuela, the trade war creator, the ripper-upper of nuclear deals. We are watching you, Joe. We are watching you, Joe. You might say you want peace with the world. When you try to equate Donald Trump with anti-imperialist states, you try to put into people's minds that somehow, those of us who want peace with Russia or peace with China or peace with Iran or peace with Venezuela, that we're the same as white nationalists and white supremacists who are trying to push for a race war. That's dangerous rhetoric, Joe. That's dangerous rhetoric, and we're watching you. We're watching you. You made a lot of promises tonight, Joe, about what you were going to do for the economy. And we're watching you, Joe. We know what you're up to. So, we might approve of what's happened, what you said, but we want to see you actually do it. We want to see what you do it. Joe, we're watching you. We got our eyes on you, all right? And I'm going to tell you, this community that watches these lives, all of us here, we know that the U.S. government murdered Fred Hampton and killed Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers, but North Korea welcomed the Black Panthers as heroes and gave them a big parade through the streets of Pyongyang. We know that the U.S. government was vicious in suppressing the Black liberation movement, but Mao Zedong wrote statements supporting Dr. Martin Luther King. Mao Zedong, he had meetings with Robert F. Williams and was a big supporter of the Black liberation movement. We know that Cuba broadcast Radio Free Dixie. We know that Stalin and the Communist Party of the United States, that they were the biggest supporters of the Scottsboro Nine and opposing Jim Crow segregation. We know that the reason the modern civil rights movement started is because the Soviet Union took the picture of Emmett Till's mutilated body and sent it all over the world. We know that dismantling racism in the United States, fighting for the rights of working class people in the United States, is also a fight against the global system of monopoly capitalism. There's nothing progressive or woke about bombing the shit out of Iraq. And Joe Biden, you told the lies to get us into Iraq. You said there were weapons of mass destruction. You lied through their teeth. Millions of Iraqis are dead. There's nothing woke about bombing Iraq and killing millions of people. Nothing woke about destroying Libya and bombing and destroying the most progressive African country like you did with the Obama administration. And Libya and Gaddafi, they were also big supporters of anti-imperialism. Gaddafi funded the Nation of Islam, and Gaddafi funded the Black Panther Party. Gaddafi funded the Irish freedom struggle. So don't tell me that your imperialism is woke, Joe. Right? There's nothing woke about sanctions, and against Iran and refusing to walk right back into the nuclear deal. Nothing woke about keeping Cuba on the state sponsor of terrorism list. There's a black freedom fighter in Cuba right now, right? A woman falsely accused of murder, Asada Shakur, she's in Cuba, right? And she's in Cuba, and Cuba is protecting her while the American government wanted to put her in prison for the rest of her life. So no, Joe. No, Joe. No, Joe. No, Joe. We don't buy your equivocation. We don't buy your equivocation. Social justice and economic justice in the United States do not walk hand in hand with imperialism. Do not walk in hand with warmongering. This is a Brzezinski trick. This is a trick that the imperialists have been running for a long time. We are not going to buy into your social imperialism. We are not going to buy into your social fascism, Joe. We're not going to buy into it. We're not going to buy into it. You want job? You say you're going to give Americans jobs? Give us jobs. You say you're going to give Americans health care? Give us health care. You say you're going to give Americans education? Give us education. You say you're going to stop the raids and deportations of migrant communities? Do it. Do it, Joe. Don't just talk about it. You do it. You fulfill your rhetoric. And don't you for a minute try to make us think that somehow the Pentagon is a human rights organization, that the Pentagon is an activist group spreading freedom around the world. Don't buy it, Joe. Don't buy it. Don't buy it 1 minute. U.S. imperialism is one of the main enemies of humanity. It's the main enemy of humanity. All the reactionary things that you're taking street cred for opposing are things that communists have been in the streets denouncing and protesting for years. It was communists who defeated the Nazis while the USA wanted to do business with them. So don't give us that, Joe. Don't give us that, Joe. The only reason that, unions in this country got the strength they got was because in the summer of 1934, there were major strikes all over the country. Minneapolis, San Francisco, Toledo, South Carolina, all over the country, workers had general strikes. And at that point, the Soviet Union And the communists in the Soviet Union were aligned with the communists of the United States. And the Roosevelt administration was so afraid of the pending rebellion during the Great Depression. That's why they passed the Wagner Act. That's why they started hiring the unemployed in 1935. So don't smudge history, Joe. Don't try to rewrite history and tell us that American imperialism is a purveyor of great woke progressive values. And don't try to silence us with your woke mobs. Don't try to say that, oh, we can ban Donald Trump from social media, so maybe we can ban leftists from social media too, because being a Trump supporter is just the same as being anti-war. Don't give us that bullshit, Joe. Don't give us that bullshit, Joe. We don't want to hear it. We don't want to hear it. You want to impress us, Joe. You carry out your economic agenda. You carry out your economic agenda, and in order to do it, you better cut the Pentagon budget. In order to do it, you better bring the troops home from around the world. You got to stop the funding of coups and CIA color revolutions. Alvaro Lopez says, as we speak, a rocket with China's space station is being launched. How do you feel about future space exploration? So there you go. I've given you my rant against that State of the Union. A little bit disorienting, isn't it? A little bit disorienting to see that, somebody who we know is a vicious imperialist, is kind of hijacking the left's rhetoric. But I think it's because he fears, he realizes that summer's here and the time is right for fighting in the streets, boy. And that's what he wants. He wants us to think, all right, Joe's got it under control. Joe's going to give us health care. Joe's going to give us education. So stay home. Stay home. That's what this is about. Joe fears, right? Joe was all about protests last summer because he wanted to remove Donald Trump. But now Joe fears mass unemployment, fears low wages, fears the decline of American imperialism and capitalism. And Joe is worried that he won't be able to control the explosion of working class anger that's coming. So you do it, Joe. You fix the economy. You take care of us. And in order to really do that, you need to shut down the Pentagon. And you need to, shut down U.S. imperialism. You need to make friends with China, friends with Russia. The 21st century is not a horse race, right? So we're not going to win against China in the 21st century. We're going to win by standing arm in arm with China. International politics is not a zero-sum game. There's one family of humanity, one shared future for mankind. And China's not my enemy, Joe. My enemy is Wall Street imperialism. That's who my enemy is. And that's who's been creating all the problems that we've got here in the United States. Dismantle the imperialist system. Build a new society where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve the people, not the profits of a few, right? That's the answer. So on that note, folks, I guess I'll just answer a couple super chats here. And after we answer a couple super chats, then we'll be done. This is my response to the State of the Union. So there you go. It's not a State of the Union, to the joint address. And that's not a marijuana joint, that's just a joint. A joint as in two speaks. Oh, okay. Two houses of Congress, joint session of Congress. All right, ISIS going after China, One Belt, One Road initiative. Look, there is a huge amount of propaganda right now trying to incite the Muslims of the world against China. We know that. We know that. That is a huge thing that's going on. The whole, the demonization and the flood of fake news, trying to accuse China of all kinds of over-the-top crimes. Jeffrey Sachs and others have said that the allegations against China are way over the top. But the allegations against China, there's a big attempt to incite Muslims around the world to hate China. And that's about trying to stop the Belt and Road. That's what that's about. And we shouldn't fall for that. And yes, in Pakistan, we have seen the Wahhabi terrorists target the China-Pakistan economic corridor. So yes, I think that you're absolutely right that that's going on. Mistakes by the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. Well, the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, there was a problem, which was that, again, as I've said many times, 1978, the sour revolution in Afghanistan, it was forced. It was the Afghan trap. Brzezinski set up a situation where the population was not ready to have a revolution. The People's Democratic Party did not want to take power. But there was a very, very big, pro-Soviet section of the military in Afghanistan. So at the behest of the United States, the Afghan government began brutally cracking down on pro-Soviet forces in Afghanistan, on generals and military leaders and people in Afghanistan that were pro-Soviet. And so there was a revolution, a coup, in order to preserve itself, right? These forces were forced to have a revolution to protect themselves. They tore down the walls of the jail. It was very famous, but it was preemptive, right? The Afghan rural population in the countryside was not ready for socialism. The rural folks, they were deeply conservative, deeply religious. They didn't like socialism. And the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan had not built up a base among the rural population. They were popular in the cities, but they were not popular in the rural areas. And the Soviet Union did amazing things. They helped mechanize agriculture and bring crops. APL, we'll talk about that. And bring crops, and they tried to do, but they weren't able to win over the rural population. And immediately, the CIA had Wahhabi terrorists pouring into the country to, organizing Muslims around the world to fight against the Soviet Union. So, that whole situation was problematic. Now, there were different factions in the Afghan People's Democratic Party. The Soviet Union liked one faction, and there was another faction that presented itself as a more left-wing faction, a more Che Guevara, faction that the Soviet Union referred to as Trotskyites. I don't really know, what was the right situation. The Soviets, they favored one Afghan leader. There was another Afghan leader who his rhetoric at least was more left-wing, and he was killed, and I believe the Soviet Union assassinated that individual. So now they did it on behalf of a faction in Afghanistan that thought that faction was dangerously ultra-left. So, the Soviet Union was meddling in the leadership of the People's Democratic Party, because the Soviet Union was fighting a war. The main thing was the Soviet Union didn't want there to be a huge base of Wahhabi terrorists on their border. And that was the plan of Brzezinski. It was not just Afghanistan. It was going to expand all through Central Asia, and they were going to start jihadist Wahhabi insurgents against the Soviet Union. And that happened in Chechnya. You had, Wahhabi terrorism there, and that was kind of the plan. Brzezinski figured out that he could cultivate Wahhabis and Saudi Muslims as proxies against the Soviet Union. I don't know what decisions I would have made if I was a Soviet leader during that time. And honestly, we don't even know all the facts about it. But I'm telling you what happened. The Soviet Union was forced to intervene in Afghanistan. They were forced to intervene, and that was staged, and it was the Afghan trap, right? Brzezinski set it up so the Soviets could be declared to be the aggressors, and that then Muslims of the world could be used as proxies to fight the Soviet Union. It was an evil plan to fight the Soviet Union that Brzezinski used, and it worked. They gave the Soviet Union their Vietnam, and Brzezinski bragged about this. He said he gave the Soviet Union their Vietnam, and he said this to a French newspaper in the 1990s. He called it the Afghan trap. The Soviet Union was invited to protect the People's Democratic Party, but there was a huge base in the countryside that didn't like it. Trotskyism appealing. All right. Why in Iran do they love Malcolm X? Well, the teachings, Shia Islam, one of the most important parts of Shia Islam, I'm not a Shia Muslim, so I don't speak for them, but one of the most important parts of Shia Islam is standing with the oppressed. Shia Islam in Iran, Trump Muslim ban. The Shia Islam, they stand with the oppressed. There are 12 imams that are recognized by Shia Muslims, and those imams, many of them were martyred fighting for the oppressed. And Malcolm X, being someone in the United States who converted to Islam, but also fought for the oppressed African-American community, is definitely loved in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I went to a whole conference in Iran where I heard from black nationalist speakers who were invited there. I heard about how popular Malcolm X is in Iran. Many Iranians admire Malcolm X because he stood with the oppressed and because he was someone in the United States who became a Muslim. So there you go. Malcolm X is definitely, I've seen firsthand, a very popular figure in the Islamic Republic. All righty. is Biden weaponizing popular culture? Yes, and the Democrats are much better at this than the Republicans. There's a lot more liberals in Hollywood, a lot more liberal singers and pop artists, and this is something the Democrats have been doing for a long time. And yes, the Biden administration, just like the Obama administration, is much slicker in managing this kind of thing. Kind of like Bill Clinton going on MTV. And you know, I mean, the Democrats, that's always been their forte. And you can probably relate that to the fact that it's the intelligence apparatus in the United States that handles the media, right? We know that, you know, for example, it's not a secret that Anderson Cooper was a CIA, started his career with the CIA. That was admitted in the Washington Post. Anderson Cooper was a CIA agent before he was a CNN host, right? And that the intelligence apparatus and the media in the United States walk hand in hand. You can read about Project Mockingbird. But that kind of, careful strategy of, more liberal politics, managerial stuff, that's the intelligence agencies. They have a more managerial approach. The Democrats are closer to the intel agencies, and the intel agencies tend to have, more influence in the media, right? In Silicon Valley, now we have social media, we have social media. And, Silicon Valley is also very much with the Democrats. So there you go. Space exploration. Again, Russia, China, and the United States should be working together. There should be joint missions to the moon, right? Not competitively, right? The space program is the future. We need to start acquiring resources from other planets. We need to think of the human race as not simply being, on this planet, but, we need to talk about human beings going other places. We need to, space is the future, right? They've already talked about mining asteroids in the New York Times. And the fact that in the United States we've got this brainwash where whenever anyone talks about outer space, people go, oh boy. It's this weird thing. But if you say, hey, we could start, getting resources from the moon, people go, oh boy, space aliens. But it's like, no, like China has already acquired helium-3 from the moon. It's not impossible. I don't know about that. I haven't heard that. Space, exploration, these are good things. All right. This is a good thing, and we should be working together. Right before he was killed, John F. Kennedy called for a joint mission to the moon. Did you know that? A joint moon mission between the United States and the Soviet Union. Imagine if that had happened. Imagine how different history would have been if the USA had worked with the Soviet Union to go to the moon. Imagine how different history would have been. The American Party of Labor. That is a small group of supporters of Enver Hoxha. And they're on the internet. They're one of these internet parties. For a while, they were getting very friendly with the Party of Communists, but then they had a bitter falling out about Russia, I believe, about Ukraine, right? The American Party of Labor was less supportive of the anti-imperialist forces in Ukraine, whereas the Party of Communists was. They're both very, very small parties, and you're welcome, B.T. Henry. They're both very, very small parties that mainly operate on the internet, the Party of Communists and the American Party of Labor. American Party of Labor are big supporters of Enver Hoxha, and they're very small, and they don't like me. I mean, maybe they've changed, but they've said some particularly nasty things about me on their websites before, things that they should really apologize for. I'm not a fascist. I'm not a Nazi. I'm not a, and they've put out some pretty nasty attacks on me in the past. And I mean, people make mistakes. I've said things about people that I regret, and I would happily welcome anyone from the American Party of Labor to work with the Center for Political Innovation and all of that. But I wish they would take back what they've said about me. I don't want to go into detail here, but people who the American Party of Labor doesn't approve of, I'm sure, as they are Marxists and anti-imperialists, have quoted them about me. Did you know that? Their mischaracterizations of me have been picked up by other people who seek to demonize me. They were hyperlinked in an article that attacked me, published in Haaretz, right? They accused me of being a fascist. And then the Israeli propaganda newspaper, Haaretz, hyperlinked them. There's a Haaretz article that cites the American Party of Labor as a source that I'm a fascist, all right? And that's what you have to remember. Look, in our little bubble on the internet, in our little internet bubble, right, you can call me a fascist because I wave an American flag and I don't have the correct position on whatever. But somebody can use that for another agenda. And there was an article that was published in Haaretz. There was an attack on an anti-imperialist conference I went to in Iran. And that article was carefully written so I couldn't sue them. It was like little statements taken out of context, etc. But it actually had a hyperlink to an American Party of Labor article attacking me. Right? So basically, and they didn't attack me because they just don't like me. It was because I went to this conference in Iran. I went to an anti-Zionist conference. So the American Party of Labor, by attacking me, basically helped Israel and Zionism. They basically helped the Israelis and Zionism to attack leftists by publishing that article. And that's what we have to remember. Right? If you want to, call somebody a fascist or a Nazbol or whatever, fine. But somebody else who doesn't agree with you and has a very different agenda than you do can then cite you as having said it, right? So you got to be careful, right? You think that we're living in this bubble where we're just yelling at each other and all of that. The whole world sees everything on here. That's why, on these streams, I don't sit here and just, I don't talk about like my family on here. I don't talk about, people I work with on here. I'm careful what I say because, again, there's probably people watching this stream right now who are not in our little leftist bubble. The internet, everything is public, right? So again, like this attack that was leveled against me by the American Party of Labor was then picked up and used by Zionism. So they basically helped Israel and Zionism by attacking me. That wasn't their intention. They just wanted to prove that I wasn't a real communist and that they are the true communist followers of Enver Hoxha. But they ended up serving the Zionists. So think about it, right? Trotskyism. Why do people find Trotskyism appealing? Well, for the majority of people who call themselves Trotskyists, right? And this makes Trotskyites very mad when you point this out, but the majority of people who say they like Trotsky, they like him for this reason. We've been told our whole life that the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, North Korea, all these countries are evil dictatorships. Well, Stalin killed Trotsky. So Trotsky seems like he was somebody who might have been a socialist, but wasn't like the bad ones. So most people get interested in Trotskyism because they want to be able to say, well, I'm a communist, but don't worry, I'm not associated with any of the communist countries. That's mainly the appeal of Trotsky. People think, they believe all the smears and attacks on existing socialist countries, and they want to be a communist, and they want to find a way they can disassociate themselves from actually existing socialism. That is the majority of people who support Trotskyism. And that's contrary to what Trotsky himself wrote. Trotsky maintained that the Soviet Union was a degenerated workers' state. Trotsky, that's not in line with what Trotsky actually wrote. Now, there you go. Now, let me add that if you actually read Trotsky's writings, he's very coherent. He's a very clear writer. But he represents the more Western chauvinist end of Marxism. He represents the desire for chaos and destruction and Western chauvinism within Marxism. And that Lenin very much adjusted Bolshevism, Marxism, for Russia's conditions. Stalin took that to another level. And that now, around the world, socialist countries are far more Eastern in the way they operate than they are in line with, what Karl Marx and his young Hegelians were advocating. Trotsky's ideology is an attempt to hold on to the kind of the Eurocentric, side of Marxism. I didn't miss it. I addressed that yesterday, but I'll say what I said yesterday. Alrighty. Okay. The Trump Muslim ban 2015, well, it wasn't a Muslim ban. It was a ban on visas for anyone from a certain set of countries. And I argued that what that was about, that was to tie the hands of the CIA. The CIA bribes people with visas around the world, in Syria, in Yemen, and many countries around the world. If the CIA wants you to work with them, they bribe you, they reward you with a visa, or they reward, your family members with a visa. And that there was differences. That's the liberals, the CIA, their strategy is to use proxies. Whereas the Trump faction, they were all about military spending and they were critical of the CIA. So that's what that was about. It was a difference of strategy. All right, Chernobyl. I encourage you, just like I encouraged you yesterday, to go and watch a great video by my good friend Don Quarter. And in that video, Don, he's got a degree in like Russian studies, speaks Russian, lives in Russia, very well-learned person. I would always defer to him on matters like that. He rips to shreds the Netflix series on Chernobyl, just rips it to pieces, learning about anti-Stalin sources back to the Nazis. Yeah, that's true. Marx in favor of Eastern socialism. Okay. So he just rips it to shreds. Just check that out. Okay, was Marx in favor of Eastern socialism? Marx thought that socialism would first come to the Western developed countries because they had to be fully capitalist first. And it was Lenin's theory of imperialism that argued that it would be the countries in the developing world that had been held back by imperialism that would first develop socialism, right? And that was the basis for Lenin's theory of imperialism, Lenin's break with classical Marxism, is that Marx thought it would be Germany and Western European countries that would have socialism first. So yes, socialism, and you should read my book City Builders and Vandals. I go into great details about this. Socialism has evolved and changed differently over the course of years, and I would argue that Trotsky was trying to hold on to the Western version of socialism that began with Marx and trying to resist the drive eastward. In Trotsky's biography of Stalin, he blames Stalin's, what he doesn't like about Stalin. He says Stalin was Asiatic, right? And tries to say that Stalin not being a true Marxist is because of his race. Trotsky was a racist, right? And he blames, Stalin being from Georgia, which is close to Central Asia. He blames Stalin's, way of being. But it's true that in a lot of ways, Stalin's approach to things was more in line with how people throughout Russia and throughout the Soviet republics that had a less Western view of things. Stalin's approach was more in line with how they see things. And President Xi Jinping, his approach is very Chinese and rooted in Chinese culture. And that Marxism began in Paris, and it began in London, and it began in Germany with Marx, but it moved east, right? The revolutionary energy in the 20th century was in the East, right? It was with the countries that had been kept poor by imperialism, and they adopted socialism and Marxism to break out of that system. So, yes, Marx was wrong. Trotskyism is largely an attempt to hold on to the Marxism of Western Europe and to hold on to the drive for chaos and the releasing of impulses, which was central to the revolutionary intelligentsia of Western Europe. So there you go. Okay, folks, it's late. I did quite a bit of streaming today, but that's good. Hey, all is good. We're marching right into May. Happy May Day if I don't have a chance to stream before May. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Action, Joe, not words. Action. Good night.